Hey guys, Ryan from Spyker Workshop. Today I present to you the CyberKAT assembly video. So this is an overview of what your kit will look like when you get it in the mail. So when you place an order for the CyberKAT, you have a couple options. You can add on a radio, speed controllers, and motors, or you can source your own stuff. So no matter what electronics you choose from my store, the base kit will come with the lights, the circuit board, all sorts of wire and connectors, basically everything you need to get everything wired up. So one thing to quick mention about the sheet metal parts is they will come with some really light scratches. It's very difficult for me to keep them looking like perfect. Just during the manufacturing process here, you know, when I put them on the bender to make bends and just handling the material. And of course, during shipping, you might get some I'm talking like light surface scratches that would be very easy to buff out if you know how to do that. Just something to keep in mind though. During this video, I will show you how to wrap the CyberKAT to make it colored. And when you wrap it, it actually hides a lot of the small defects that it might come with. If you do want to keep the bare aluminum look, I would still recommend wrapping it and follow what I do in this assembly video, but buy clear wrap, the same type of stuff that they put on front bumpers of cars to protect the paint. You can put on this, and it will still protect from getting scratched, but will be clear, so it will still have the aluminum look. Here is a quick overview of all the injection molded parts. And all these are molded here in our shop. They act kind of like leaf springs. They're very stiff, but when you go over bumps and stuff, it will give it just a little bit of suspension. And on some of these parts, you'll have to do a little bit of cleanup. Like some of the wheels have just a little bit of stuff on the ends. Just an X-Acto knife will get rid of that in like a second. And then also on some of the gears, there's just a little bit of plastic to clean up, not very much. Next, you have to get some of these parts ready by drilling the holes out a little bit larger. So for example, on the lens and lens mount parts, you can see on the chart here, this is the drill size needed for the specific holes. Just be careful on the lens. Try not to drill all the way through. A tip for drilling out the lights is just put a piece of blue tape so you can't drill through the front of the lens. Some of the injection molded parts need to be drilled out larger, and the pinion is the only difficult thing. So depending on what shaft size your motor has, you'll want to drill out the pinion to match that. The ones that I supply with the kit, it's 5 millimeters. And then also you have to drill if we look at the chart, 1/8 inch hole that goes through the pinion, and that's for the set screw to hold it on in the vise like this. And then you won't accidentally drill your hand. Up close to that. And also with these gears, which have to be drilled out like this, one other thing to get ready is this aluminum plate. So you'll just clip out each part and then file down that mark. Here's after I've taken the parts off of that sprue and cleaned up the edges. Here is a look at the hardware, and most of this is stainless steel, but the nuts are zinc coated. There are 3 color choices for the Velcro. I'd recommend pouring the bags into little tubs like this, just to keep it more organized. And these bags of screws are for the track, so I would just leave those until you get to putting the track together. So everything, for the most part, is bent for you here. However, these 2 parts, my bender cannot do bends that are inside of the shape. So these you'll have to bend yourself. That's why I made them into tabs. So all you need is a pliers, and then here is the bottom shape. This one, shaped like this, is the front. So we want to bend these tabs into approximately the same shape, so this fits in here. So let me show you, like this one for example. I'll hold my pliers right where the kind of the notches are, where that piece starts, and then this stuff's very easy to bend, so it's not difficult at all. But I'm going to eyeball this bend to be parallel to this, if that makes sense. I'm going to do that to both sides, and the back one's virtually the same, just slightly different angles. And then these inside ones, all the way across here, also match the profile of that, if that makes sense. So if I look at it from the side, this tab, that one, and this also are all in the same plane. And these don't have to be perfect, because as you screw it to this part, it will kind of bend to the perfect shape, if that makes sense. The only ones that are tricky are these. So these ones have to bend to match this angle. So if you take it and then you can just fit it on this part. You'll have to do both at the same time though, otherwise it won't fit down in there. Somewhat like that, so when you look straight at it, it should make like one continuous shape to follow this. So you'll have to tweak it a little bit, but it should fit somewhat like that. Before we start assembling the CyberKAT, I got to talk to you about the wrap options. So I don't sell any of this with it. You can get a hold of this stuff either like on Amazon or local car shops. And it's the same stuff they use to wrap cars. It's a vinyl, comes in rolls, and all you really need is a heat gun. So I got this heat gun just at the local hardware store. It was about 20 bucks. I got one of these on Amazon. It's like a squeegee, but one of the sides is felt, so you don't risk scratching up the vinyl. I'm going to go over just the very basics of like how I did my other two CyberKATs, and just like generally how to start wrapping this thing. Online there's tons and tons of videos on how to do vinyl wrap. I'm like an absolute beginner, but all those parts will be blue, and then all these parts here will be white. You can do any color combination you want. I mean, there's so many options with this thing. But I've been buying their 3 by 5 feet rolls. You can get them for around 25 bucks a piece on Amazon. And I bet one of these rolls would do the whole thing, or it easily would. But I like to do 2 different color options, but you know, it's totally up to you. They also have like camouflage and like all sorts of really exotic stuff. But I'll show you how to wrap just a couple of these pieces, because once you get the hang of it, it's like the same for each part. If you like the aluminum bare look, I would recommend still looking into clear wrap so you can preserve the aluminum, because it does scratch really easily. But the clear wrap would at least protect it from scratches. So I'll start off really small and show you guys how I wrap this part. So first thing is to clean it. I'm just using basically a Windex. And then just clean off a little bit of the backside. Because with this wrap, you don't really wrap the back sides of the parts. I mean, you could if you want, but they're all hidden, so you won't really see them. So keep in mind when you cut the vinyl that you're going to be wrapping it around some of the seams. There's a backing. So when you're doing the larger parts, be careful when you peel the backing, because it gets kind of a static charge. So if there's like debris and crumbs around or dust, it will kind of cling to the back side of this, and then you'll have defects. For the larger parts, I actually recommend just peeling back a little bit, applying it, and then peeling it off as you go. But the smaller parts, you can peel off the whole thing. And then I'm just going to set it in the middle like that. So this stuff, it doesn't actually activate until you put heat to it. So it's not very sticky yet. So you can reposition it a lot. And then on the bigger parts, I would be using this to... So you want to put just a little bit of pressure to make it stick to the part. So just for a second, I'm going to put some heat around it. See how it starts to kind of curl like that? So then I'll come to the back and start kind of curling it over, and you can kind of pull it. So again, there's tons of other videos about vinyl, but the very basics is you kind of heat it up a little and then just pull it a little bit as you go around the edge. And kind of just do one edge at a time. So see how I can stretch it and pull it around? And then I'm going to go and work around and do that to all the edges. And then when I'm all done, I'm going to take my knife and cut a clean line on the back just so it's not all bunched up. So here I stretched it around all the corners like that. Now I'm going to use my knife and clean it up. So there it is, cleaned up a little bit. So now I'm going to take some heat all around the edges here. You can see how it kind of curls like that. Then I'll just use my finger and kind of put some pressure on it so that adhesive will stick. And I'll go around and do that to all the sides. And one thing to keep in mind is that the adhesive that's on the back of this only activates with heat. So the more heat you put to it, the more it will kind of activate. So once you have it in place, I'm going to do a final pass of getting it really hot. Get that out right. I'm going to let the piece heat up quite a bit too, so that all of the adhesive gets activated. And then I'm going to do it on this side once more here. So you want it like not too hot to touch, but like hot, so the adhesive activates. If you go too hot though, you'll like melt the vinyl. Like in this section up here, I held the gun on there for just a little bit too long. See if I can get that in the reflection. And then the only other thing to do is, if there's screw holes like there are here, just take the knife and kind of make like a X through the vinyl. So then later on you can find the screw holes to line up the parts. I think the most challenging piece is the top lid because it's so easy to see. So any little speck of dust or anything in between the vinyl and the aluminum will show up. On one of my CyberKATs I've had to do it twice just because I got a couple defects in it. I have a piece cut up already. Try and clean it as best you can, because any little dust particles will show up afterwards. Then I'm going to use that squeegee and try to get some of the air bubbles out of there. But what's nice about some of the vinyl, they have like a honeycomb structure, so it makes it possible to get bubbles out. So one of the ways to do the edge is kind of have it off the table, but I'm going to put some heat to it. And then kind of pull it down as I work across the edge here. One of the hardest things is where you go over an edge to keep air out of here. you really have to stretch it around corners. And once it gets cold, put heat to it again. And you'll notice like an air pocket if you missed some air in there. So on the front edge where it comes to a corner, I'm going to pick a side and cut a slot. Kind of cut all the way down, like a relief cut, I think they call it. And then I'm going to fold it over. Let's show you here. So see how I kind of wrapped it all the way up around the inside, just to help prevent it from coming loose. But then when you're done, you'll want to go over the whole thing. You know, don't go with too much heat so you melt it, but you want to bring the whole piece up to temperature. Like, I'm not sure what temperature this specific vinyl sets at, but I've been just, you know, once it's too hot to hold on to. And one nice thing about vinyl wrap is if I want to remove this, I could easily right now take the vinyl right back off. So like if you have to start over or something, or later down the road, if you want to change the color of your CyberKAT, you just put heat back to it, take it off, and put on new vinyl. Here I'm wrapping the rear section, and this one's not too difficult. Notice here I didn't wrap this. I kind of missed that, but in the assembly, the sidewall will be right up against that, so you will never see that. And then the bottom, you don't have to wrap all the way around these tabs. So I'm going to just wrap them just like this, and then I'll take a knife and just cut off just where you won't see. So here I have cut and trimmed it up. The most complicated pieces to wrap are the fenders. So I'm going to do mine white, and you need, this is a 3-foot long piece. The part's about 30 inches, so you need like a 3-foot long piece, and then by 1 foot. So I got it measured out to 1 foot here. And then make sure to clean the part. So I recommend starting on the bottom of the fender and then wrapping up and around the top. And I would skip wrapping this surface just because it's so close to the tracks, it's probably going to get beat up. And I would not peel off the whole roll yet, so just expose a little bit of the wrap like this, and then I will start on the bottom like this. So you want both of the ends, like where the corner is there, on both sides to line up. You can go over, and then you just trim it later, but try to get it close. So there I have it smoothed out on the bottom. Then I'm going to slowly put heat to it and pull it all the way around the edge. I'm going to do one surface at a time. So here I have it on this side. And this seam is the most visible on the whole thing, so I would try to pay attention to get all the air bubbles out of the edge. You like pull it tight as you wrap around the side. So once you have it up over the second seam like this, see how I did this one and then this one, and then there's kind of like a ripple there. This surface will be covered where that triangle shape is right here, and this part you won't see really under here. So you want to make the cut like this, so when you fold it over the edge you cover up that. I'll show you in a second here. So here's before I put heat to it and wrap it around. But see how I have this part covered up? And then I made some relief cuts where that hole is there. So now when I put heat to it, you can take and roll it around all the edges here. Sorry if I keep getting that off the camera. And this will be covered up by a plastic part. That's where the trim lights go, so they don't have to look perfect. But just as long as yours looks something like that, with this part being covered white, because you'll see this part when it's all assembled. And then I'll finish wrapping everything around the edge. So here I have most of it done. I'll show you how to trim it on the inside here. I didn't do the front yet. I'll show you that in a minute. It still just looks like this. But the side here, and take note that this part moves because we haven't screwed anything together yet. But follow the shape of this part up to this point and kind of cut it off like this. And I'm not going to wrap it past the other side. And then just follow that metal part up to here. And then this part, just go maybe a ½ an inch down, because the top lid will cover up all this inside stuff. And then on the back, you want to leave about 1 inch of the vinyl right here, but then trim it to the shape. And then cut this loose stuff kind of like this, so you have some material to work with when we do the lights. I'm going to put some heat to it, just a little bit, so you can see where the metal edge is. And then I'm just going to kind of push it in just like this, just so we can see where the edge is. And then what we want to do is trim this, so you want only maybe about 1 inch or so around the edge. I'm going to do it to the bottom also. I do that here also. Just enough so we can see where the edge is that we're working with. So now that I have it somewhat trimmed up, we got about 1 inch of material to work with. I'm going to go at each corner, just a little bit out past where the metal is, and then make a slit that's kind of in between those angles. So like on this side, and then also on the bottom. So this bottom edge is a little bit different. I'm going to cut it at the same angle. It's kind of sticking out. Kind of like that. And then we basically fold all the edges inwards when we put heat to it. I'll start with the top. And you don't put that much heat. And then you kind of like crease it underneath here like so. And this edge will be visible even after we get the lights installed. So you want it to look as good as you can. But this is definitely the most tricky part. And it's hard to not get fingerprints on the inside of this vinyl stuff. But see how this one I tucked kind of underneath that seam? And then this side. And you can kind of stretch it too around like that. And then the bottom. It's hard to keep some of the creases out, but like that far back, the light will cover that. So you only got to worry about maybe the first ½ an inch in the front here. And then this I'm also going to wrap around. I'll trim up some of this loose stuff. But that's pretty much how you do that front seam. And then it's the exact same in the back. So here is the back end. And you can see I cut this edge just a little bit too off. So I'm just going to take a little cut piece and just put it right over the top of it. It's very difficult to get this stuff perfect, but that will hide it. Even though there's just a little bit of a seam now, it will look better than having metal exposed. Also, when you're done with each piece, don't forget to do one final pass of the heat gun to heat the material up like a lot. You want it a little too hot to touch, and then you know that the adhesive will set up. But I'm going to do this for probably a couple minutes on all the sides again. So an issue you might run into when you start using the heat gun for the final bake is if air bubbles like this show up. On Amazon, the same place I got this squeegee from, it came with this special pen, and it's like a needle point, and it's meant for this vinyl stuff. So if you get an air bubble like this, you can make one little dot with the needle in the middle of the air bubble, and then with the heat gun on it, you can kind of rub the air towards that little bubble you made. Sometimes it will just go away just when you put some heat to it, just like that. These are the most tedious part, and they're going to take the longest to wrap. So there's 4 of these. The side that you'll put the wrap on is where the angle comes out towards you like this. So I lay them upside down and then roughly cut a piece of vinyl for them. And what makes these tricky is that there's a interior corner like this. It's not an outside corner. So it's really hard to get the vinyl down in here and get all the air bubbles out. So I would start on that seam. Try to get these 2 surfaces covered first before you do the rest. Here I have the seam wrapped. If you get an air bubble or anything anywhere, just use that one needle pen or even a knife just to try to get it out of there. And then I didn't wrap around the edge yet. So this one's a little bit different. I went around the outside and gave myself just about 1/4 of an inch. And then I also made relief cuts on all the corners. It will make it a lot easier to wrap it around the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap all of it around like that. Here is that part all finished. So you can see I just had it go around the back side just a little. And then this area here, I would trim nicely, because when it's in the machine, the tracks and stuff will be over this, but you could still see this edge. It's just not that visible, but I would clean it up a little bit. And then also make some holes for where the screw holes will be. And then also this part will be the same color, white. Here I have all the parts wrapped and ready to continue assembly. For this step, we'll need these screws and these parts. So these will be mounted. It's kind of hard to see the holes because of the wrap, but there's 2 holes right there. And then don't screw these tight yet, just leave them loose. So it should look like this. Using these screws and these parts, we will be assembling the hull reinforcements. So there's a right and left to each piece, and they go just like this. And then just for now, do 2 screws on the top. Here I have those parts screwed on here, just the tops for now. And then there's also a screw right through here. And they all use flange nuts on the inside. And then the other side. Using 10 of these and these screws. And then the parts from the last 2 steps. So I have these fenders tipped upside down. And then the front hull that we put those brackets on, tip that upside down like this. There are 5 holes here that will be lining up with 5 holes here. And these nuts are a little tricky to get in because there's not much room to work with inside here. Since they're flange nuts, they do grip on, so you don't need to get a wrench back there. All you really need is to spin the nut onto the screw. I'll show you what it will look like here. A tip for getting the screws to line up is if you put the nut in first. So if you have it on your finger like this and go back behind the hole, and line up the threads, then it's a lot easier when you hold the part up here to feed a screw in to the nut. Here I have one side attached, and note that the first 2 screw holes up here go in this way, but the other 3 come in from the outside here like this. And then leave everything loose still, so don't tighten any of the screws, because we need to wait till like a lot of other parts are together before we tighten stuff. Here I have both the sides connected. They're still loose because we'll adjust it as we screw on some more stuff. Don't do these 2 upper holes here yet. Those will be in a second. Next thing is to take the bottom floor pan, and this cutout section goes towards the back. And then here you're going to feed this point in between, just like this. So it goes in between these 2 parts. So it should fit like this. Then I'm going to do those bottom 2 screws there. And then also at the same time, I'm going to screw in the back plate. So this back part, along with these spacer parts that look like this. So these spacers just take up the difference like this. And then I'll screw that in there. Here are those parts attached now. Just to show you up close here. So there's a screw right here, and then these here. Show you on the outside. And then if you look straight down, that spacer that we put in there should fill in the gap here like this. Should look just like that. 2 screws here. You can screw together 2 here, and then also all the way around both of the front edges. Before you screw these 4 screws on the back end, there is an optional trailer hitch that you can put on. You set up these parts like this, with the curve facing towards the top of the CyberKAT, and then using the same screws you can add on the trailer hitch. So I have most of the screws in, just to show you up close here. All these screws in the back, the 2 right here, and then kind of hard to see in here. But I got these ones, and they're all still loose. I still have not finished tightening them. To begin tightening them all, to start locking everything together, this part here, it should be parallel to the back section, because the lid will lay across. So when you tighten, there's a screw underneath here. There's some play in that, so you want to kind of make it level if you can. That one screw kind of locks together these 3 parts. So this part, you can see there's still some up and down movement. So this edge should be flush. If you look, when I move that white part up and down, you'll want that edge flush. See how it's not there? So have that edge flush, and then this edge level. To tighten that one, it's a little tricky, but you can get the screwdriver underneath here, and then just hold it with your finger, the nut. That top part should be locked in there. I'm going to go and continue screwing all of the pieces together. Here I have everything screwed together, nice and tight now. So the frame has quite a lot of rigidity. Battery trays, so there's 4 of these. They go in these 4 holes along the wall, and then the 4 holes on each side of the floor pan. So these parts are a little challenging to get in here. So one tip I have is hold one of the nuts on your finger, and then hold it up against the hole, kind of like that. And then take the screw, feed it into the hole on the back here. Then if you do it right, they should line up. And then for the next hole, and here I have the battery trays installed. See what that looks like here. And then we should have the whole hull screwed together at this point. Be using this hardware. And this is the mount for the snowblower being developed still. That's what these front brackets are for. First thing is put one of these flange nuts onto the long 1.5-inch screw. But then we're going to take the aluminum spacer. But then I'm going to put that through right here. Flange nut on this side. 1-inch screw. So another aluminum spacer. And this is how it should look when you're done tightening those. And in the future, when the snowblower is ready, there will be some sort of mechanism that latches down here and then clips up to the top. Next, we will put together the lid using this hardware. So these braces go in here upside down like this, underneath the flange. And there's enough room to feed in the nuts here. And then also these door latches, there's 2 holes right here. And this is what it should look like when it's put together. So next thing is we're going to start on the lights. So in the electronics document, it tells you how much wire you have to add on to these plugs. So these plugs come with about, I think it's like a foot or 10 inches or something of wire. And then your kit will come with a little spool of wire and some heat shrink. So if you follow the guide and solder on the amount of wire it says, so there's front lights, rear lights, trim lights, and then the big lid lights. So the circuit boards, these all come in your kit. They're all custom made light bars, but you have to break them apart. They come with these little pieces that hold them together. So I would recommend using 2 different pliers and try not to grab onto the components. If you grab right here on like the battery connections, then they just kind of snap apart. And then you'll do that for all these. I'm just going to show you really quick. And then part of the thing that's left over, you can use like a clipper and then just clip that part off. So I'm going to do that to these and get all these separated. And then I'm going to wire all the leads to them. And then each of the boards have a plus 5 volts and a ground on the back. And just like the photo shows, wire them all on the back side, not the front side. So when you're wiring the lights for the lid, it's a little bit different than the others. So it calls for 24-inch wire. So here I have 24-inch. I'm going to run it through these holes that are in these braces like this, and then feed it out where the actual light will come in. Here is the lid with the lights on, but I also used a zip tie here to hold this wire on the end that's closest to these. And then I basically cut the wire in half and spliced together a connection using the plug's wire in the middle. And then if you look at the front, pay attention also to the orientation of the lights. The notch here should match the notch on the lid like that. So next we'll put the lenses on the lid using these screws and these light parts. The side that has this clip is the front, and then that's the rear. So the front, you have options of different color choices. The lights put out a white LED, so whatever lens you put in front of it will change the color. And then we also need to get this black part to go behind the lens, which we can still do if we feed it down like this here, down the channel, and it should push through like that. And then just make sure that you line up the black part with the lens, the same notch that's cut out there, the orange on this. So it should fit in here. Using those screws I showed you, you come in from the back side. There's a screw hole here, 4 holes basically. And here is the lights screwed on. So it should look like this with the notch below. And then the back side, same thing. And then should look on the inside there. So it's those 4 screws. Next we'll put the lenses on the lights using these screws. So here you can see I have the wires wired on. So we have the front lights, the trim lights, and then the rear lights. A few things to note is the black parts for the front. If you look up close, right here they have a triangle. So the triangle are the front lights, and then the square are the rear lights. That's how you can tell those apart. And then the trim lights, there is a right and left to these. One of the corners has an angle. So I'll take one of the lights, feed the wire in through the back like this, and then take the lens, and that just gets screwed on in there like that. You can just screw directly onto the light like this. It's just one screw on the back here. Here's the lights screwed together. So you can see what it looks like here. Should look like this. And then the trim lights, you'll want to match. The lens has one corner that should match the black part. Then feed that wire in. And then you might need to file it down on the ends here if it doesn't fit very well. And here are the trim lights. The corner here will go on this side. So I'll feed the wire in and put that in place. Should snap in there. I'm going to do the other side too. And if you have a hard time, you can file down. So on these black parts, there's a nub on each side. So if you have a hard time fitting it, you can always file it down a little bit. To put on the front lights and the rear lights, you'll need to use these screws. So there's 2 screws up underneath here that go into here. And it's a tight fit, so you have to kind of angle it like this to get one of the ends in first. Kind of like this. So you get it all the way in there. So you can see here I got the machine upside down. Then you can rotate it and watch for the hole. And this is how the front should look when you get them screwed in. And here's what the back lights should look like. To put the lid on, we can now put the other latch component, which uses this hardware. These 2 holes here on both sides, they're adjustable up and down. You want to adjust the height so it will grab the lid and hold it tight against the front and rear. If it's too high and has some play in the lid, then you gotta slide these down. And if it won't grab onto these, then they're too low, so you gotta bring them up a little bit. And there I have that part screwed in. So it should snap like that. And then it shouldn't have any play up and down. Like if it was too high, the lid would rock back and forth. And if it was too low, it might not have grabbed on. We will put together the wheels now using this hardware. 3 screws go through these little holes here. And then there'll be a washer in between the part before you put the other wheel on. That washer prevents squeakiness from happening. When this material gets wet, it can have like a squeaky sound to it, but the spacer there will prevent that from happening. Here are the wheels screwed together. Just make sure to put the washer in between the plastic parts so there's just a little bit of a gap. And similar to the last step, we're going to use the same hardware but no washers for these parts. 3 holes, screwing them back to back like this. And the reason for this is my injection molding machine. This is about the maximum amount of plastic I can mold. So they needed to be a little more beefy than that, so I had to just double them up and do 2. It goes the same for almost all these parts. Here are these parts screwed together. We will assemble the idler wheel using these screws. So on these aluminum parts, there's a right and left. One side has a bigger hole than the other, and that's basically to get the screwdriver in there when we start screwing together these. So the way it works is we'll feed in the screw, then we'll put one of these bushings on here, then the idler wheel, and then the other side like this, and then I'll put the lock nut on this side. This is how that should look when it's together, and these should be in line like that. So line them up, and then it should look just like that. Next, to put together the swing arms, like the suspension arms, we'll be using this hardware. See how these have a pocket on one side, not the other? So I'm going to put the screws in the flat side like this, and then it takes 4 of them. Then if you set it down like that on the table, put 4 of these on, and then drop the wheels on like that. Take the other one, flip it over so the flat side's like that. And then I'll use the lock nuts to screw it together. Here they are assembled, and 4 complete sets you gotta make, and show you when it's all done, and they should free spin pretty easily. We will start to put together the suspension housings now using these screws. So everything here is right and left, so it should be laid out as follows here. So this is one side and that's the other side. So first thing is, on each of these things there's one hole kind of down here. This takes the 3/4 inch screw with a flange nut on the back, and these are actually used as bumpers to stop the suspension from going too far up. You'll see when you get it put together. But there's that one, and then one on this side here like this. Same thing. There's 2 holes here, and then 2 holes here. This part will be screwed on like this, and then it will be screwed on the other side like that. The front idler wheel will be using the small screws on these 2 holes here, and then you'll feed a nut in the back side here. And then leave these loose, so later when you get the track on, you can adjust the track tension like this. This is what these should look like when you get them assembled. So I'll show you here the inside, and then the front, and then it's the exact same on the other one, just flipped around. So to attach the wheels to the track supports now, we'll use these screws and these molded spacers. From the front side, so this is the motor mount side, that's towards the rear. This side is the front. So we'll feed in a bolt from the front like this, and then on the inside we'll put one of those spacers, and then we'll put the suspension housing like this, and then feed the bolt through a little bit, and then on the back side also another spacer, and then it comes out the side, and then put another spacer, and then put a nut on backwards like this, So it should look like that. And then just hand tighten this. So it should look like this when you're all done. Just make sure that the bolts are sticking out on this side. And then show you underneath here. So to attach these to the CyberKAT, I'll be using the same nuts from the last step. Those bolts will get lined up with those two holes there. They should set down in there so the nut is flush with the hull. So on the inside, those bolts we just put in are right here. It's a little hard to feed the screw on there, or the nut, but I'm going to put that nut on here and then spin them on and push them in so you can hand tighten it as much as you can. And then I'm going to do the same to the front. The front one's a little harder to get at. It's kind of down past the battery mount. You can kind of see it through these access holes here. So I got the inside as tight as I can by hand. They should just have just a little bit of wobble to them. And then to finish tightening it down, the kit will come with this CNC little wrench. So we're going to put it on that bolt on the outside and loosen this bolt, which will actually squeeze against the hull and tighten the whole assembly together. You don't need to go too tight, but decent amount of pressure, and then it makes it really solid. I'm going to do it to the same on the back side here. And this is twisting those two nuts together, so it acts like kind of like a clamp. Let's try to get close up so you can see. And there I have both of the sides done. So it should have quite a lot of strength at this point now. And then just to show you from the underside view, should look something like this so far. To get the motors ready to be used, I'm going to solder on some wires and connectors like the diagram shows. 10 inches of wire with this type of connector on them. And then also I'm going to use a Dremel, and it's about like 1/4 of an inch to the end. I'm going to Dremel a flat spot on both of the motors. Here's what the motors should look like. So I heat shrinked the terminals, got this type of connector on them, and then also made a flat spot on the end of the motor shaft like that. So to start the transmission, we can get together some of the gears using this hardware. So we're going to put a bearing into the pinion, and then another bearing goes on the back side of the large gear. And then the only difference is one of these gears will have two of these stacked up like this using these longer screws, and then this one will just be single stacked using the shorter screws, and then make 2 sets of those. And this is how the gears should look when you're all done. Those bearings might fall out, but just keep an eye on them. They're kind of loose in there. But so you should have 2 types, one with 1 gear and one with 2 gears on it. So for the transmission plates, we'll need this hardware. And to start with, we'll take 2 nuts, or 2 screws and 2 nuts, and feed them onto one screw like this. And then this screw will come in from the back of this. 2 washers. So it's 2 of them on each post. And then another nut. But then for these bottom 2 holes, it's just the screw without a nut on it. Again with 2 washers. So there I have both of them on. And there's my little assistant giving me a hand. If you guys remember back in the 2X CyberKAT video, Tiki made a presence. Here she is again. And one other thing to note about these is tighten them pretty good so they don't loosen up, because later in the assembly we'll be putting a nut on this side. Next up, we'll need this hardware. The same direction that the studs are sticking out now, we're going to put the screw in like this, and then I'll feed a nut all the way on, all the way to here. A tip for getting these on is use a socket, 8mm, and a wrench on the other end. And then it should look like this. And then when you're done, there should be right and left side like this. So the long screws on one side and then the short stubs on the other side. So for the transmission, you have a decision to make if you want to set it up for low speed or high speed. And your kit will come with these two sheets to show you the differences. And then it also has detailed drawings to show you how it should look for each setup. So using those M5 lock nuts, we'll be setting up the transmission for whichever one you decide. For me in this video, I'm going to go with the high speed setup. The main difference between these two setups is one of them adds this double gear, this single gear. So for the low speed option, it steps down through another gear set to give it more torque, but lower speed. And then on the high speed one, we eliminate that gear, and it's a little bit rearranged. You can compare the drawings there. So for the high speed gear setting, if we look at the picture, this plate is on this side, and this one is on this side. I'm looking at this right here. So if you're working on this low speed setup, you'll follow similar. So on this, we're going to take this double gear, like it shows there, and put it on the bottom like that, and the bearing fell out, so don't forget to put that back in there. And then we'll use one of those nuts to spin the nut on here to keep the gear in place, but don't over tighten it. You want to have just a little bit of play. And then if we look here, there's another nut that will be about the same distance here and on this shaft or screw. You can see them in the photo here. And then that will allow the motor plate to be supported away from the gear like this. Then just to show you really quick, if I were doing the low speed setup, I'd be working on this image because the plate's like that. So it's a little bit different, where the double gear will go on this shaft. And then again, don't forget the bearing behind it. And then a nut will come up to the back of this. You can see it here on the image. There's the double gear. And then we'll put a nut on this shaft, this one here. And then just to show you here, so if we put a nut on this side, it would stop the gear right about there. Then we'll put another nut here and here and here. And then that motor plate will be shifted. Kind of complicated, but when you got these drawings in front of you, it should make a lot of sense. Here I have the transmission ready to put the motor on, but just to show you here. So if you look straight down on it, see how I use the nuts to hold the motor mount out there? It'd be similar on the other transmission, but not the exact same. You'll have to follow the diagrams depending on which one you want to set up. And here for reference, I have my green CyberKAT right now set up for the low speed, high torque. This just gives you another view on the different setup. See how there's a couple extra nuts spacing out the transmission plate or the motor plate. And then here's the other side. So to attach the motors and then the pinions, you'll be using this hardware. So the motor pinion, you have two options in the kit. You have a 8-tooth or a 6-tooth. No matter which transmission setup you use, these will change how it works. So if you use the 6-tooth, it will have a lower speed but a higher torque. And then this one will have a higher speed and a slightly lower torque. So you can pair the high speed transmission with one of the high torque gears to kind of be somewhat in the middle, or go with one of these to have it as fast as it can be. And then the opposite, if you did the low speed transmission, this one, then you could have it even slower and even more torque by using the small pinion. So it's all just whatever you guys want to do to your own CyberKAT. These brushless motors, that's the part number there, or any similar sized motor will work in this CyberKAT, but you have to supply all the electronics and stuff yourself. You can see they do line up with the motor mount. You just have to angle it just a little bit. And then of course you would have to enlarge the shaft size. But another quick thing about brushless is if you do go this route, you have to use really high current battery packs, something that can handle the discharge rate of these. The sealed lead acid batteries that the brushed ones run off of won't be able to handle the power of something like this. Here I got both motors connected, and you want the gear to have just a little bit of play like that. So you don't want it to mesh too tightly. It should spin pretty easily like that. So to get the CyberKAT ready for the transmissions to mount, we're going to use this hardware and these two aluminum parts. So we'll use the screw feeding in from the back side, or the inside of the CyberKAT, and it's going to go through these 3 holes, and then in between the fender and the hull we're going to put one of these black spacers, and then we're going to take one of those metal parts, and then we'll use a lock nut on the outside here. So it should look like this when you're done. So to assemble the sprockets and the drive shafts, we'll be using these pieces. And I got the molded parts really good on tolerances, so it's like a really nice press fit, or hardly even a press fit. So to start with, we'll put on the sprocket, and then some of these black hex parts. First one goes like this, and then the next one goes same direction. So there's 2 of them on this side. One of them just acts as a spacer, and then the bearing will go on like that. And then on the front, we'll use a fender washer and a screw to connect it. I'll do that to both of them. This will be inserted like this. And then on the inside, I'm going to put a bearing. One of these will go in like this on the inside here. And here's what it should look like inside. To attach the transmissions into the CyberKAT, we're going to use these nuts. I'll take this transmission and line it up with those 3 holes. So you can see those 3 posts come out of the hull. So we want to get nuts on them. So I'm going to put 3 nuts on there. These are a little tricky to get on. Kind of helps if you use 2 hands and try to spin it on there. I would recommend using a similar wrench, because there's just enough space in between here to get the bottom of the wrench in here to tighten these nuts. And they don't need to be very tight, just tight enough for the flange to lock into the metal there. And then like the bottom one here, you can tighten it up just like this. And then this one's a little trickier. If you get it as close as you can first by hand, and then it doesn't need that many turns to get it tight. So here's what it looks like on the inside, and then on the outside over here. So with the transmissions in, now we have to get the final drive gear installed. So it's using the similar hardware that we put on the sprocket out here. So I'm actually going to pull the sprocket out. So see how I'm pulling that shaft back out in line with that spacer there. Then I'm going to feed one of these gears in. Make sure that the lock nuts are facing this way. And then the easiest way to feed it in is from the front all the way like this. Kind of roll it back. And then you should be able to get the hex in there, pushing that drive shaft in. Kind of like that. And here's a different view of it on the angle here. So we'll feed in that screw and that washer there to lock that in. As you screw it together, make sure that that bearing is inside of its mount right there. So at this point, the transmissions are done. Everything should move pretty freely. If you did the other speed transmission, these plates will be closer to the middle and these wires might hit each other. So if they do, you can kind of bend the wires out of the way a little bit. Don't go too much though, you don't want to damage the motor. So these parts are optional. It's really just for looks, but you can use this hardware and those parts to connect the sprocket covers here. And you can either go this side or this side. It's all just personal preference. And here's that part installed. To assemble the track is really simple. In your kit comes a bunch of screws and also a driver bit. And some of the tracks might need some cleanup, either on the sides like this has just a little bit of flashing. A knife can clean up really easily. And also where the sprue breaks off might need to be cleaned up. But to assemble them, it's really nothing to it. You just put the screws in. Recommend using a drill to save on your hands. And then I'm going to run the screw in and stop before it's tight. You want to leave a little bit of a gap. So this is how they should look. They should have a little bit of slack in them. And you can see the screw's not all the way in. It's got a little bit of play. So we'll do that to put together two tracks. And each track should be 52 links. Easiest way to put them on is angle them like this, so you got the edge facing that way. And then pick the CyberKAT up and set it on the track. Load it on the back sprocket here. The easiest place to screw it together is in the front, because the drill can fit in here without any problem. And then to adjust the track tension, it's those 4 screws that hold the idler assembly together. So if I loosen those just a little bit on both sides, I can pull that part out. Some slack in it, like you don't want it crazy tight, but in the middle, see how the track goes up and down? You want it kind of floating right in the middle, and then screw it together. And then the other ones, you can put your finger up where that nut is to hold it from spinning. As you run it, the tracks might get looser as everything works itself in, so you might need to adjust these if you notice too much slack. This pretty much completes the outside of these CyberKAT. So to get started soldering up the SpykerKAT board, you'll need these parts, which all come in the kit. And please note there is an error on the labels, so I crossed out. Just ignore that. I mixed up positive and negative on the labels, but if you follow what I do here, everything will work just fine. But we're going to be soldering on these connectors to the board, and the plugs and the fuse holders. Then also I'm going to be making this plug If you want to add your own power switch, you can. However, I just come with a simple loop plug. This way you can turn on and off the machine by taking out the plug, and it kind of acts like a key, so nobody can drive off with it if you don't want to, say if you got kids or something. But you can add on your own a switch to this terminal here. And I made them a different plug, just so you don't mix this up, because this is positive, and you're just closing the switch together. So don't mistakenly plug in anything else to this port. That's why it's a different connector. And then also, not included in the kit, if you want to add like a voltage meter inside the hull or something, you can plug into this port. And then just to quick kind of explain what this board does, when you plug in the speed controllers, each speed controller has a BEC, which is a battery elimination circuit. So, like for example, here we're running off of 12 volts. Well, the receiver runs off of 5 or 6 volts. So in the speed controller, they go from 12 volts down to 5 or 6 volts. And on my board, I have them split up separately, so we're making use of 2 separate BECs. So one of them will be powering just the lights. That way when you floor it or it comes under load, your lights won't flicker because there's a separate BEC that's operating that. And then the second BEC will be powering the receiver and then any servos that will be used in the future. And this port will be for the snowblower attachment. Once I get to that, it will be power for the snowblower or other future accessories, and then servos also. So my board will take signals from the receiver and then basically forward them to the snowblower later. You could play around with different values. I've had good luck with 20 amp fuses. This one's doubled up. They share the same terminals. It's just that the fuse mount was only good up to 30 amps, and I needed to fuse about 40 amps. These motors seem to pull around 20 amps a piece, like at maximum. And later, when the snowblower is attached, there's a separate fuse just for the snowblower. But it's highly unlikely you'll ever be pulling a total of 60 amps because you're not driving at like maximum speed while you're snowblowing. So the fuse holder are actually these little metal components, and it takes 2 of them on each of the fuses. So like this one, for example, you would solder these in there like this, and they would face each other. So that creates a fuse holder, and then there's a total of 4 other spots here for that. These, which are for the servo signals, all of these are in rows of 6. So there's 3 6s here, 2 here, and then 1 there. So you can break these into 6. One easy way to get started soldering this is loosely place these components here, the white connectors and then the fuse holders, and note the direction of the white ones like this. And then if you take my business card that came with the CyberKAT, you put it on top of those components, so then you can flip the board over and hopefully they stay in place. Then it's easy to solder them on like that. So another tip is before you solder, it's good to heat the board up, because this is a 2-ounce copper board, so there's a lot of copper to heat up for all the soldering. But I'm going to use my heat gun and heat the board up just a little bit. If you heat the whole board up, it makes the soldering much easier. And you can do that in between each solder if you really wanted to. So I'll just keep working my way around the board. Soldering on the RC connectors is to put a little dot of solder on just one of the pads. Then you can feed the connector in from the back side and just put the soldering iron on that one pad. and then it will stay in place if you just get one connected. So once you have just one of the terminals soldered, see how they're still loose, you can do the rest of them, but make sure not to do the same one until you get some of the others, otherwise it will just fall out and you got to redo it. So if you start on the other end, kind of like that, and then once you get some more soldered, then you can come back and do a better solder on the original joint. And then when you get them all soldered, it should look like this on the top. When you solder the Dean's connector on, make sure you leave the plug in on the top. That way this won't overheat and melt the plastic. Keeping it plugged in while you solder it will let some of the heat distribute between them. So next we will solder on the connectors, and we'll use the same trick where we flip it upside down. But if you look at the connectors up close, this one is just a little bit taller, so we'll save those for the last. Otherwise it won't work flipping it upside down. So if we follow the chart closely and follow the direction of each plug, you notice how one end has a rounded edge. Just match it up with the circuit board. It has the same shape there, so you can see like this. Do the same trick with the business card. Flip it upside down. And then this one is a little rocky though, so I'm going to put another one of the same connectors just loosely back over here, just to stabilize the board. Then it's easy to start soldering. And again, I'm going to use the heat gun, because these connectors, they take quite a lot of soldering power to get the solder to flow around them. Is what it should look like when you got those soldered. And make sure to get all the way around the ring. And then next step is we'll do the other connectors, like these, using the same trick. Just make sure you follow the print. So these ones are a little bit too big for the business card, so you just put your finger on the other one. Should be able to get it to flip. And then I'll solder the rest of them. Here is the circuit board all soldered and ready to go. I also got that loop, which is used as a key and switch. And then the underside. So it's important to do a final check to look at all the traces to make sure nothing's bridging together. And most phones have the ability to zoom in. So if you can't see good enough, take out your phone and set it to a mode where you can look up close. Because any shorts could blow out certain electronics, so just pay close attention to that. Some 20 amp fuses. And again, you can change if you want to try a different amperage depending on what motor setup you're using. And another thing to mention, if you're using brushless motors, depending on the current those draw, you might not even be able to use this circuit board for that. You could still use the circuit board for the lights and the receiver breakout stuff, but if the current is too high, I would wire them up just directly to your battery pack, because this board is really only meant to handle about 60 amps total. So if you have the blower running and your drive motors, just make sure you stay below 60 amps. So there we go. Next thing to get ready are the speed controllers and the batteries. The speed controllers might vary from this. It depends on if these supplies go short, because there's a lot of supply shortages going on right now. But I'm still able to get a hold of these, so it'll be similar. But these come with just really crappy connectors on them, so I would cut these off and solder on the nicer XT60 cables, just like the image shows here. And these you don't need to add any wire, just directly replace the plugs with those. And then also each of these ESCs, they have a selector switch right here. So if you're using seal lead acid batteries, I would switch it to this one, nickel metal hydride battery. It's actually already over there. And then this is if you're like using an RC car, it's forward, brake, and reverse, or just forward and brake. Or if you take it out, then it's no brake, which is what we want for a tracked vehicle. So remove that top one. So there's lots of options for batteries. You can run just lipo packs. It makes the machine a lot lighter. So for the snowblower, I would recommend using 4 of these. So you can run either 2 or 4. I've personally been running 2 when I go out to just drive around. But once the snowblower is out, I'll be using 4 just for more runtime. And the board is set up so that all these connections are parallel connections. So no matter how many batteries you plug in, it's always 12 volts. So this whole system runs on 12 volts. And these batteries are pretty common. Here's just an example, but there's thousands of different companies making this exact form. But you normally just search for like 12 volt, 12 amps. And I don't sell these. You have to get these on your own. I always get them on Amazon. And there's, I think local places sell them too. But you'll have to connect wires to them. So the kit comes with wires and plugs for batteries. 8 inches of wire coming out of the battery. Here's the speed controllers with the connectors all wired up. So using this hardware and these parts to put together the electronics tray. So these will be connected like this with that bracket facing inwards using screws. And then this back part has 3 screws, so 2 there and then 1 on the back like that. So I forgot to mention on these parts, the screws should go from the inside out. Otherwise the nut will be in the way of the other screw here. And then that should look like that. Next step is to connect the board to the tray using these screws. So here is the circuit board screwed onto the tray. Should look like this. Put the speed controllers on the tray. So this picture in the corner here is a recommended layout. If you position the speed controllers this way, where one's this way and the other's rotated, then they can both reach the plugs. So I got the speed controllers taped on. Plug in the speed controllers. So they go on these ports. And the circuit board has a third one in case in the future there's anything else inside the CyberKAT that is powered. And then these 2 will go to the motors as soon as we get this put into the hull. And then the servo wires will go to the port on here, that's ESC 1 and 2 right here. Your kit will come with some servo cables also. There's 4 of them. So I'm going to plug in 2 of them here. And these will be the 2 signals that will go back to our receiver. So the receivers could vary too, depending on what's available. But in this video, it's these. They should be pretty similar to each other though. So I'm going to go from channel 1 on here to channel 1 on the receiver, like this. And then channel 2 to channel 2. And then the other cables will be sideways, and so these 2 cables will provide power to the receiver, but all the other channels we only need signal wires. So just pay attention to the orientation. Actually, I'm going to go this way. So if you have them positioned like this. And try not to mix these up because it will mess up the receiver. So this is channels 3, 4, and 5. So I'm going to match that on here just on the signal wires. So it will be like this, channel 3, 4, and 5. And then the other cable is channels 6, 7, 8. Well, there is no 7 or 8 on this receiver, but we'll still plug it in like this here. And if your receiver doesn't have room to plug in like that, you'll have to remove some of the cables and cut the connector down to fit. Then in the future, that snowblower cable will just plug right in, and all the signals are being forwarded already from the radio. So then this, I'm going to get some sticky tape. I actually cut some, before I taped these, I cut some little pieces off. So I'm going to sticky tape this inside here, sticky taping the receiver on the side wall here. And then there's some extra holes here in case you want to zip tie any of the wires out of the way, but that's all optional. The electronics tray to this CyberKAT. So 4 of them will come up from the bottom, and then 2 of them go into this front panel through this part here. So it should line up just like this. So here I have it screwed together. So there's a hole back here that you can run the motor wires through. So I have the lights routed around behind this part. So there should be 6 of them here. And then I'll plug in to these connectors. And then the 8th port is extra, and the 7th port is for the lid. So as you put the lid on top, you always have to plug in that one. So to get the batteries in here, if you're going to use the seal lead acid ones, the Velcro cut to 24 inches. Feed the Velcro in underneath like this, so pull it around, and then leave a little bit of slack on the bottom and a lot of slack up here. And then the battery, make sure to have the terminals face backwards. So you kind of put it in here like this. And then it should drop down onto the tray. So these trays have bent edges all the way around to hold it from moving around. And then with the Velcro, we want to put some tension on it and then kind of fold it up over the top like that. And then that shouldn't come out of there now. You can tip the thing all the way upside down and it should be pretty good in there. So I got 2 batteries ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and plug them into the battery ports. So 1 on each side. And say you had 4, you'd want the leads here so the wire could reach to the other port. If you had them way back here, it's probably not going to reach. So to set up the radio, if you order the radio through me, it will come with one of these types of radios. And when you first turn it on, sometimes it gives you a warning. So it's looking for the throttle stick down and all these switches up, and then it will turn on. And then there's a few things we got to set up before we try and get the motors to turn the right direction, because that's one of the main things here. If you hold down OK, it will bring you to the menu, and then up we'll go to functions, so you hit OK, and then we're going to go down here and edit the mix. So you hit OK to advance down the list, and then these will change the values. So we're going to turn that on, turn that to channel 2, and that to channel 1, turn this all the way up to 100, and this all the way up to 100, And then to accept this, you hold down cancel. I don't know why they did that, but hold down cancel. That beep sound means it's saved. I'm going to go back into mix and change it to mix number 2. And then it's similar in here. The only difference are the channels are flipped around. And then also it's negative 100 for both of these. And then again, hold down cancel to confirm. So what that did is it will make this joystick have tank steering. So like that will be forward and right and left. If you want this joystick to be how to drive the CyberKAT, you're going to have to open up the radio and physically rearrange either the spring or move this joystick over here. And then also you might need to change the mix options. So let's say you did that. This might be channel 3 and 4, and then on the other page it would be the opposite also. But these mixes make it so it will mix those two channels together to create like a tank steering. So now the next thing we have to do is see if the channels are reversed or not. So everything should be ready to go. I'm going to turn the power on, see if we have lights. So the light should work at this point. So this part is always a little challenging. You have to figure out which method will work, like 3 different ways to flip the steering around. So for example, right now, when I try to go forward, it starts turning. So that's not right. So one of the 3 ways to try to fix that is go back in the menu, hold down OK, into functions, and then reverse. So let's try to reverse one of the channels. So that almost works. So if we flip it back around to the other way, so 2 is reversed. That actually works there. So we have forwards, backwards, and then left and right. So a few other things. If you're using the other transmission set, each motor will be inverted because the gear makes it spin the opposite way. That's added in there, if that makes sense. So this method might not work. Another way, if you go down to mix, so it was on channel 2 and 1, so if I flip it to 1 and then 2, and then if I go over to mix 2 and also flip these back around, so it'd be 1 and then, or 2 and then 1, and then hold cancel. I'm going to turn it back on and see what that does. So yeah, now it's back to being flipped like this. So if none of those methods work, another thing is you can physically change the motor plugs. So have this motor go to the other side here. So basically swap them in combination with trying some of the settings on the radio. And if those don't work, you can also try to swap the receiver signals around. But in combination of trying all these different things, you should be able to come up with it going in the right direction. So there, now I have forward and backwards, and then right and left. So one other thing to quick note is when you're all done with the settings, make sure to turn off the CyberKAT first. And then when you turn the radio off, you want to give it a couple seconds before you turn it back on, because it will save the settings to its internal memory. So if you turn it on and off too fast, it might lose some of the settings you just set. The CyberKAT now should be fully working. So when you're out of battery, this port here can be used as the charger port. You still need a 12-volt battery charger, but you can plug the charger in right here and it will charge both of these at the same time. Or if you had 4, it would charge all 4 at the same time. Because they're all in parallel, acting as if they're one 12-volt battery. Each battery, I wouldn't charge more than maybe 3 or 4 amps. So when you're running 2, charge at maybe 6 to 8 amps. And then 4 batteries, like 9 to 12 amps, is probably the max you'd want to charge these at. And one last thing is to put the lid on, and to mention, if you have the radio and the CAT off, you can turn on the speed controllers just if you want the lights to display without driving it. You'll notice the speed controller blinks red, meaning there's no radio signal, so there's no risk of it like flying off the table, as long as it's off and the radio's off before you turn it on, because it's nice to display it with the lights. So for the lid, just that one wire hanging down, we'll plug into one of those ports, and then just be careful every time you open the lid to unplug that first. And then put the lid on. And so here's what this color scheme looks like at night. I think it came out really sweet. And here we have a pile up of CyberKATs. You can see all the different color combinations you can come up with, even just with the lights. So that wraps up this assembly video. Thanks for watching, and please email me if you need any help with anything or got any questions. And hopefully you guys can get your CyberKAT up and running. So thanks.